everyone. I'm Emma Varvaloucas. I'm the Executive Director of the Progress Network. We're an idea movement for a better future. We're bringing together people from across different fields to see what kind of future we can build together. I'm here today with one of our members, Faisal Saeed Al Mutar, and he runs an organization called Ideas Beyond Borders, which I'm really excited to have him talk to you guys about. I'm going to kind of leave the introduction there, mostly because part of the conversation is going to be explaining this work and what drives this work. So with that, let's jump right in. Faisal, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. And thank you for all the work you do. I'm a big fan.
You as well. We're big fans too. So yeah, let's start with the basics here. What is Ideas Beyond Borders? What is the work that you guys do?
Yeah, so Ideas Beyond Borders is an organization and a movement, and the mission is making inaccessible information accessible. And our focus region is the Middle East, which is MENA region, which is the Middle East and North Africa, and mainly is the languages spoken there, Arabic being the first one, and then Farsi and Kurdish. Not only there is very little content in these languages on the internet, there is very little factual content of these languages on the internet. So on that ecosystem, that we believe that prior to our work, the ecosystem of very little content and very little factual content, it created called kind of the fertile crescent of misinformation and propaganda and extremism. And that allows, that in a way slows the progress and prosperity within the region. So we've made, there are a lot of problems that somebody should focus on, and they're all as equally important. But we believe that this subject of content and ideas and the lack of availability of these ideas and accessibility of ideas is something that we have the ability to change. And we've been doing. We started around roughly 4 years ago, and we're continuing to do the work and actually expanding.
That's great. Yeah, certainly in the last couple of months, last year, and then again in the last couple of months especially, we've all seen the effects of misinformation and disinformation here in the States. So I think people can certainly understand what sort of landscape on the ground might be like. So tell me.
It's definitely. One article I've written is that the Middle East is misinformation on steroids. So it's a global issue, and it existed really for most of history. But I think now there is more institutionalized misinformation compared to sometimes it's just people spreading it. Now is that there are efforts and movement and really, in the case of the Middle East, regional states that are focusing that as a full-time job.
Okay, so how exactly is IBB combating this? What do you do to sort of halt the flow of misinformation?
So we have two strategies. One is a long-term strategy, one is a short-term strategy. And the long term is the one that we believe is more important, is getting people to understand media literacy and critical thinking. So we have created a significant amount of content that was not available in Arabic and translated them into Arabic or created original content working with local folks. People are consuming most of their information these days on the internet and also mostly on social media. And they go through browsing through the Facebook feed, and they are bombarded with all types of information all the time. And how they can differentiate is that this is real and it's not. And really, the simple answer is look for the evidence and how much evidence there is to support the arguments that are in the articles, whether it's a blog or it's an unknown source or it's a known source. And if it was a known source, obviously it's considered that they have more editorial policies and they have kind of checks and balances on reporting, that kind of filters out the misinformation. And so that's the long term. The short term, especially with the significant campaigns that were launched on COVID, we had to intervene because of many regional actors, especially in the case of the Middle East, whether it's Iran, China have wrapped up their Arabic channel. So they had Chinese journalists who speak fluent Arabic, saying that the U.S. and the CIA created the virus. Russia Today Arabic also brought a biologist claiming that it was made up in Maryland and stuff like that. So we had to kind of intervene, especially in the first months, to create content that was factual. But mainly the long-term solution is that how can we create an informed society that is not receptive to misinformation? That is the ultimate goal. And we're trying now. This is 2021. We're thinking of working with schools, with universities to really figure out how can we create an engaging curriculum and modules in which that is relatable to the culture. I mean, translation is one thing, but how can it stick? Because that's really I think the bigger task, and that's what we're aiming to do.
So it's this double combo. I know because IBB has done a lot of translation, in particular of Wikipedia articles that weren't available, for instance, in Arabic, and also books. And now as well, you have this third component of media literacy, finding your way around the internet, which certainly, as you said, it might be a particular problem in the Middle East, but it's, I think, a problem everywhere. So we might need to come to your organization and get this going here in the States as well, I think.
More than happy to share. I mean, that's the thing that we're going to work on more this year, is to do more and more measurements. And yes, it's a global problem. And happy to, after we do most of our work, happy to share our research with.
I think we'd appreciate it. Yeah. So of course we can't talk about Ideas Beyond Borders and how that organization came about without talking about your own personal story, because the two are very intertwined. I heard you recently became a U.S. citizen, so congratulations about that. And of course, you were born in Iraq under the regime of Saddam Hussein. So can you fill in those blanks a little bit for us? How did you end up in the States?
Definitely. So yeah, I was born right after the first Gulf War in Iraq. I was born in Babylon, which is the old city of Babel. And then I grew up in Baghdad, which is the capital city. And my dad is an orthopedic surgeon, my mom is a lawyer. And we moved to a neighborhood that used to be where Saddam Hussein generals used to live. So when the Iraq War happened in 2003, our neighborhood moved from a residential neighborhood to Al-Qaeda household. Mm. So that was my kind of first interaction with terrorist groups on a personal level. And also on an informational level is we moved from a controlled state in which the government controls the truth. So for example, like I didn't know that Iraq invaded Kuwait until 2005, because the narrative that we were told by the state was completely different than what the reality was. So we had if you own any forms of accessing information from the outside, like satellite television or even radio, you might end up in jail forever, or sometimes even death penalty for those with extreme cases. So we moved from that to a kind of a much more chaotic situation, which we moved from 2 state television to 1,000, and each one is owned by different militia, funded by different country. So we had a very different landscape of information. I compared from 1984 to Brave New World within the span of a year.
This complete 180.
The complete one, in which now is like there is no such a thing as truth, and everybody in which we became more and more. So you had the sects, the larger sects. You have Sunni, Shia, and the Kurd being a different ethnicity, and even within that, there is zero, pretty much, concept of what the truth is, and as a result of that, the post-war is when the kind of the civil war happened after the one of the leaders of Al-Qaeda blew up one of the large Shia mosques and so what was it like on day-to-day basis? I mean, my school was blown up multiple times. My crazy self decided to speak out against extremism at the time.
At the tender age of what, like 14 or something, right?
Yeah, and 14, 15. That's when I kind of started, and mainly it was the first Iraqi elections, and I saw that how democracy that was kind of brought up to Iraq ended up being a mess because the democracy ended up more like a mob rule and more everybody and all of the kind of the politicians at the time, and it's still the case, appealing to kind of the most primitive instincts of tribalism, of sectarianism, of hatred. So in a way is that and democracy institutionalized that form of tribalism that was not. So the Shias have this amount in government, and the Sunnis have this amount in government, and in ways that now people start designing their life. So if the Shias control the Ministry of Communications, I'm going to go study communications in college because I'm a Shia, and therefore that is the route. So in a ways that the sects and really which is you get born into, and it comes to your birth certificate pretty much like 10 seconds after you're born, decides now your pretty much your life, your career, your career choices, your even marriage choices, everything became decided by these elements, and that have really get worse and worse during the years that I was living there, and it came with a lot of personal cost of losing members of family. Ended up on a local death list that eventually I had to leave the country
because you were speaking out.
Yes, mainly, and what was unfortunate is that really the like at the time it was really costly to speak on a personal level, so we were easily targeted. So now thankfully there's kind of a larger movement that is speaking out, but at the time we were just couple of folks really, and we were very easily targeted. So on that note, I ended up on local death list, and I had to leave the country in 2009. Ended up in Lebanon on the hopes of immigrating to Europe, mainly that kingdom, and I got rejected. And so I received one of the people who, because I was accepted in multiple universities there, were kind of sympathetic, and he said, "Oh, we have similar education system in Malaysia." And I checked that Malaysia doesn't have restrictions on Iraqi citizens. So how about you go there, and maybe when you get education, you will be able to immigrate, and you will have more doors open after you go to college. And I went there, and then I applied for refugee status in Malaysia, knowing that I cannot go back to Iraq under these conditions. And so I was studying in college, and then I got accepted to the United States in 2013. And I came as a refugee then. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I became a citizen as of 2019.
All right. Well, I'm sure the States is very happy to have you. And I mean, how did your personal experiences lead you to the idea of IBB? I mean, like there are a lot of different ways that your personal experience could have affected what you decided to do, right? Like, how do you see that line from your personal experiences to the choice of this nonprofit?
I mean, yeah. So from on the information landscape, and I've mentioned how we moved from. I mean, the reason I mentioned that my dad is an orthopedic surgeon, mom is a lawyer, not for bragging purposes, but more for the fact that in Iraq, medicine is taught in English. So my parents taught me English since I was young, and by the fact that I was able to speak English, I had a completely different information that I was accessing than what my peers were in high school and even in out of college as well. So that really motivated me to get into the world of translation and making that information accessible, because the internet and where it became kind of more popular in Iraq post 2003 is you have the Arabic content, and people, a significant amount of it, not all of it, is, I mean, the joke is that like the Arabic internet is mostly about cooking and extremism, which we're actually kind of.
I'm glad there's still humor about this. It's amazing. Humor never fails.
Yeah. So, and that's actually like it's not far from the truth. Is that is what, and it's still even the most dominant news sources of the Middle East are still state-run. So you have Al Jazeera, which is owned by the government of Qatar. You have Al Arabiya, which is owned by the government of Saudi Arabia to some extent. So pretty much that's where most of the information is consumed. That's where most, and as a result, most of these countries have their own agendas, and they have their own sectarian motives in many cases. And then there was more the neutral world, which is the one that is not emotionally invested in all of these sectarian conflicts, which was really the outside knowledge, and so that's what I was mostly consuming the information out, and I wanted to really get that available as for people to be able to look at. So,
because it was in English, so it was like this whole world that was available to you.
yes, yeah. So that is really where I would say like my motivation, even when I was a teenager, was. But now as I came to the States, and a combination of survival guilt to some extent, and now that I'm in a better place than I was before, and really having this more skill sets and more connections and more people, I felt this is the time for me to actually institutionalize this effort and go to the already existing efforts that exist in the region that's trying to do that, and there are many, but really put them all under one umbrella versus all of them doing their own work and really in a very disorganized way. I wanted to give it more of an institutionalization because it's a very big task and cannot be done by one person. It has to be done with a collaboration with a lot of other groups, whether local or international.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the whole idea with the Progress Network as well, is that we're more powerful together than separately. So spell out what it looks for us sort of on the ground. On the ground is kind of a funny term when you're talking about a lot of online work, but spell it out for us in terms of, are these people who are translating from here in the United States? Are they in the countries that you work in? How do you get in touch with them? How does this all work?
How does it all work? So we have our flagship program is called the House of Wisdom 2.0, which is named after the first House of Wisdom in Baghdad. That used to be a translation center in the Middle East. So all of our translators are based there, and except we mostly do the project management here and kind of the project planning, but really most of the, actually all of the people who are translators live in the region. And there is, I mean, the main purpose is that eventually people in the region are the ones who are responsible for their communities. So in a way, and the goal is that if we empower them enough, then they will be able to create change from there. So without an outside help. So I mean, in terms of programs, it's divided into articles and books, and so that's like short form content, long form content, and we have an advisory board that advises on, which is made mainly by a lot of people in the region, who advises on what is the content that is lacking in the region. So there is very little about the history of even the history of the Middle East that is not available in Arabic, or there is very little science. Actually, science is one of the main things that we have a significant focus on because the Arab world is one of the least producers of scientific research around the world, which is kind of very sad. So we have an advisory board that chooses, and we also run a lot of informal surveys within our very significant subscriber base, which is about 4.5 million, telling them what type of content do they want to see translated. What is something that they have been searching for, but they haven't been able to find.
What kind of things do they ask for? I'm just curious.
It's actually it's very diverse, but a lot of it is really science. There's a lot of lack of and when the COVID thing happened, I mean, even like the basic stuff, which is like what are measles and vaccines and all of that stuff. Many of them, even Wikipedia Arabic, they only had like a sentence or two, and people wanted to get more. I mean, they want to be more informed about these subjects. So between that, we have a team of about 120 people. They exist in the Middle East and North Africa, and they have a pretty now very good system called the engine, in which somebody translates. I mean, the article gets picked up, then somebody translates it, edit it, proofread it, and publish it. So now is that with that streamlining, we're able to do roughly somewhere between 500 to 700 articles a month. So that's
quite a lot.
Yeah, so our production actually is in constant increase, and we have done about 15 books.
I mean, yeah, that's just an amazing amount of content, and I'm sure it's sort of an endless supply too. So lots more work to do.
But the great thing is the demand is, which I think is very important to highlight here, is, I mean, our content so far between the Wikipedia articles, which we have actually a partnership with Wikipedia, has been viewed roughly. I mean, actually not roughly. The last statistics we got is 45 million views of the articles we have translated, and the video content which we created that are related to these articles and related to these books have received 35 million. So the demand is really there for such content, and the main thing that is lacking is the supply. So that's where Ideas Beyond Borders come in.
I mean, of course, just the sheer amount of eyeballs on this is one form of feedback. What about, do you ever get feedback from people personally? Do you hear from the people reading these articles?
I mean, we run surveys at the end of the year. Actually, end of last year, asking for feedback about the website. How can we improve it? Is this important to you? Do you think it's important to your society? And the answer is pretty much all positive. And I mean, we've got some, I wouldn't call it pushback, but I mean, the authoritarians because I don't want to like exaggerate, because many people, I mean, obviously I've come from Iraq, so my standards of security are probably lower. But I mean, we've got some pushback from some states, so mainly in governments within the regions, that they saw most of our content as a threat, and we receive feedback from people. Oh, I've been trying to access your website in Syria, but I cannot access it. I was trying to access it in Egypt. I'm not. So there is definitely that, which is the and kind of the internet censorship and internet circumvention, which we have also been working on, trying to get the people kind of called VPNs, which is for them to be able to access censored websites. So that's definitely an issue. So not only we get feedback, but we also get lots of emails when our website is not accessible in some countries, and for us, we need to be able to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, so given that there are at least a few governments that seem to be aware of you guys and what you're doing, what about the people who are working on the translations themselves? I mean, is there any risk in them being involved in these projects?
Definitely. I mean, it's the culture of conspiracy theories and misinformation, as I said, there's a fertile crescent, an ecosystem for that. And mainly what some of the regimes and extremists try to do is utilize kind of this anti-imperialism, anti-colonial narrative to kind of shut down any form of information come from the outside in order for them to control the sources of information themselves. So the main security, and that's like sometimes all what it takes is an accusation with zero evidence, is to accuse somebody that they work for the CIA or they work for a foreign agency, even if that has zero fact, that there's zero evidence about that. It's one of these accusations that are very common against activists, against anybody who's civil society, is to connect you with kind of a foreign country, and this is part of the agenda of the U.S. And I was like, where is the money? I mean, I'm getting the accusation, all the accusations that I get money from the U.S. government. I get zero.
I would love a big check from the U.S. government. Thanks very much. Yeah.
I wouldn't say no. I mean, I'm getting the accusations already, so might as well get paid for it. But
yeah, you're getting all the flack, so you might as well get the benefits.
So that is actually one of the things that I wouldn't say it's just a specific thing to IBB's translators. It's just very. I mean, for example, Egypt have banned pretty much most foreign organizations, and they have banned many of their people to receive any kind of funding or training from foreign organizations, whether it's something to do with journalism, something to do with media. So there is this lots of attempts to really ban working from NGOs and foundations other than that exist outside. The solution for that, from our end, we're actually establishing local branches within these countries, starting first in Iraq, where we have most of our operations, including on-the-ground operations. And not that it's going to change anything. These accusations, as I said, can come up very easily. Somebody can just write an article or something like that. But mainly is that how can we ingrain that in the society that people will not think of these ideas as foreign. So even subjects from critical thinking, media literacy, they should not see it as, oh, this is an American thing or it's a Western thing, but rather is the goal for us is to localize this information, make it applicable to the day-to-day life of everyday citizen. So that way, nobody sees it as there's kind of a dissonance of, oh, this is our culture and there is the Western culture, and our culture is about this and the West culture is about that. So the more we can reduce that kind of distinction and make people get people to see how they can think more critically about the information that they see, I think is the ultimate goal here.
Yeah. So this brings me to something I wanted to ask you. This idea of having people understand this content is kind of homemade or local. It's of their own soil. Is one flavor you're trying to aim for. And something else that I saw on your website was that it was within one of your updates about IBB is that people who like to repress, disinform, censor information, you wrote, prefer a lack of positive content. So you said, we think of this solution, i.e. IBB's work, as achieving herd immunity via broader access to content, which I just wanted to say too, it's sort of tragically hilarious that herd immunity has become such a common word in our lexicon. But the question really is about why would a regime like in some of these countries prefer a lack of positive content? It's a question that's especially interesting to us at the Progress Network because we're all about engaging, constructive ideas and a constructive tone. So yeah, I'm curious. I mean, why is a lack of positive content such a good control mechanism?
That's why your work is very important. So I mean, I'll give you like some examples of how some of these regimes operate and really how some of the extremists operate. Mainly, they operate as defenders of that community against the other community. So how they generally start, they start with extremely negative. So for example, ISIS, which is kind of the role model of terrorist groups, is most of their content is we're under attack. The world is terrible. The Shias are trying to kill you. Iranians are trying to kill you, and that is how they get acceptance within the mainstream population. Because many of the questions that always come up about many of these terrorist groups is why not anybody speaking out? Why are these people are able to operate? And mainly they operate because they have instilled a lot of fear from the quote unquote the other side, in which people, when they do a simple cost-benefit analysis, they see that these people, mainly ISIS, are better defenders than the guys who are trying to kill them. So they really the thing that they want to ingrain generally is that when people are fearful and they're very much receptive to misinformation, and they're very much receptive to the propaganda that comes in from these extremists. And the same thing with a group like Bashar al-Assad, so like in Syria, in which really all what they do is constantly run negative ads about the opposition, and negative, not just ads, but rather channels and shows on 24/7 basis that is about how bad is the other side is and how Assad is the savior of all of this, how he is the person so with all of that, there is very, like, when I was growing up, mainly under kind of a sectarian civil war, most of what was told about the other sect is pretty much only the negative things, right? And there is and one of the things that they tried to stop, especially the extremists and Al-Qaeda, was that to stop any form of positive thing happening from that community. To stop that news from. So if it was somebody opened a restaurant, like a Sunni and a Shia opened a restaurant, and they want to do coexistence, this news became difficult to talk about, and they started actually persecuting people who talking about good things and positive things happening from the other side. And so that's where kind of the importance of, I mean, obviously people should not say positive things for the sake of them being positive, but also to provide the full picture and reduce the kind of the main drive that allows extremist groups to take over, which is fear and really the ideology.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this brings to mind a few things. One is that this is definitely one of the psychological reasons why you're seeing so many conspiracy theories blooming during the pandemic, right? Because you have this sort of global fear of all of a sudden this disease stalking everybody. Zachary, the founder of TPN, likes to say sometimes that if the United States in particular, and also just the world, we're in such an apocalyptic mindset already, we wouldn't have found it necessary to launch an organization that was connected through a constructive mindset, right? Like, you're saying there is not worth in saying positive things just because we're trying to be positive. The idea is that if you sincerely believe you're in a world where what you do in the future doesn't matter because anything that the future holds is, a pile of flaming whatever, then that is, of course, going to affect how you see the world and how you engage with the world.
100%. Yeah. I mean, this is the ecosystem. I mean, between hopelessness and a combination with that there is something better in the afterlife is the ecosystem that allows most of these terrorist groups to operate. Is that and give you an example, like one of the people that they have interviewed, it was like a former ICE member. I mean, technically he was in his head, even though he actually had the ability to go, and sometimes many of these ISIS actually members are upper middle class individuals. They're not like the poor of the poor. And many people were like, well, how this ends up is like you have a surgeon, you have people flying all the way from Europe to join that group.
Yeah.
And mainly because of that apocalyptic ideology in which, the Europeans hate us, there's a war between the West and the East. And even though some of that, I mean, you can see that this person is promoted in some good hospitals and works in a good company. So you would think that this person doesn't have that much grudges against the places that he lives in, but it's not the case because he is constant. And the extremist group, it created targeted marketing campaigns targeting people within these regions. For example, there was like an ISIS video targeting taxi drivers in Moroccan taxi drivers in France and Belgium and all of that stuff, telling them, see, you've been living there for quite a while, nobody likes you, you're still a taxi driver, you should have been. That shows that this is the enemies of God, and that's how they start with appealing kind of the feeling of hopelessness, and then, well, we have the solution, and here's our solution. Here's the call to action. Come join us. And technically, what do you have to lose? So if you die fighting for the cause, you're going to go to heaven. If you spread the word about the cause, you're going to go to heaven. So that way, they just and working mainly on fear and anxieties people might actually already have of fearing about the future, and live on that and give them call to action. And just like the capital thing, to some extent, is relevant in a bit because these conspiracy theories have been running for ages.
Yeah.
They had somebody who gave them a call to action, and that was it. So really, all what you need is somebody who is charismatic enough to direct all of these ideas and all that information they've got before, and give them a place to go to or something to do, and that's all what it takes.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting to think about the parallels between the work that IBB does in the Middle East and, for instance, what happened at the Capitol. I almost just said last month. It was a few weeks ago since we're filming this end of January, and it's also interesting for two reasons. One is that I think it becomes easier to explain to people why this work that you're doing in the Middle East matters to us here, right? Like this is certainly a situation that we can see parallels to our own situation in the States, and B, because it's sort of dissimilar in the sense that people in the States do have access to a wide variety of content on the internet, and yet you have seen a lot of people falling prey to conspiracy theories and other forms of disinformation and misinformation. I mean, I guess what you're saying is all you need is one charismatic leader.
Yeah, there are definitely. I mean, as you mentioned, the issue within the United States is not accessibility to that information, because it is, and I think the thing where I mentioned at the beginning is that there is very little factual content in Arabic. So there are more factual content in English than in Arabic. However, those who are in the fact business or the fact world should do a better job to make their content more appealing than, and that's really the kind of the genius, or the genius that we need really in how to make facts as exciting as conspiracy theories and engaging as conspiracy theories. So that's what, like, I think is like our work really overlaps with a lot of other organizations that are doing. I mean, part of the reason why we focus on the Middle East is, and not kind of go spread all over, is really to do it right, because there's a lot of organizations that I see want to fix the whole world. And really, if we do one region and do it really well, which is a big region, I mean, that's where roughly 300 million people live if you add North Africa to it. So that's a lot of people. So I think my plate is already full.
Yeah, I think so too.
And when it comes to like why people should care, I mean, what we're seeing right now from the misinformation that's happening in the West, and kind of this is, I mean, the Middle East is the story of what happens when it became what goes all over the top. Like the polarization that we're seeing in America is the mother of extremism that we see in the Middle East. That's what eventually happens when you have people from getting their sources of information from everywhere, no agreement on facts, sectarian narrative. What you see in the Middle East, what you see in many of these civil wars, is the end goal of that. So the Middle East, in a way, is an example. Studying it more and learning about it more is an example of what would happen if America continues the path it is heading to some extent right now, with all the polarization. And it's kind of good. I mean, President Biden made unity to be part of his messaging at the beginning, because it is really bad on that front in terms of how people are getting less and less connected. So that's number one. So that's from just a research purposes, understanding the Middle East is important for U.S. interest. Number two is, which I think is like a more geopolitical reason, which is something I it's in the website as well. I said that the Middle East is the opposite of Las Vegas. What happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. And the region, I mean, geographically, I mean, as you have seen from the Syrian refugee crisis to the Iraq war, and the kind of the aftermath of the Iraq war, but all of the influx of refugees into Europe, and kind of, which also adds in and destabilizes Europe more, rising of populists who want to kick out these immigrants. Many of these countries also happen to be small, with very kind of small economies that cannot handle. Europe cannot handle another 300 million people.
Yeah.
So eventually, all of this. Well, I'm big supportive of these kind of local NGOs that try to help refugees and settle them, all of that stuff. But that is just a temporary measure. Eventually, these countries over there have to be in a better situations in which they don't send refugees. So I think that's, I would say, like, from a geopolitical reason why the Middle East is important. So and add to that is obviously the humanitarian element is, and I think where IBB's kind of differs is that we're really teaching people how to fish. So we're not trying to, and that's what it's a long-term solution. So we're not, oh, here's some cookies or here's some food, get a feed you hungry for, or keep away from hunger for a couple of days, but rather is how can we empower the minds and the skill sets within that region in which it becomes sustainable on the long run, and in which we will become less and less relevant, and for them to take the leads in shaping their own future. So I think is that the combination of all of that is that you have a long-term solution of a humanitarian, you have the geopolitical, and also you have the research element is, I think what makes the Middle East amazingly important to work in, and however that doesn't discount the importance of I mean domestic issues. I mean America as a country. I mean when I was a teenager in Iraq, I used to look up to the kind of the values of democracy and the values of freedom. So in ways that if democracy gives up on that, that itself will cancel the hope for millions and millions of people around
Yeah.
the world. So in ways, domestic politics are also very, very relevant. The protesters in Hong Kong were carrying U.S. flags because they saw that kind of symbol and that flag as a symbol of freedom and democracy and all of that type of stuff. In ways that if America gives up on that, that also has foreign policy consequences.
Yeah.
So I think is that all I'm saying about the importance of the Middle East doesn't negate the fact that domestic politics is also very relevant because does have effect not just on the Middle East but the whole world.
Yeah, well, I mean, just it comes to my mind that what's concerning about the U.S. is that if you all agree on the narrative that the U.S. is in decline and that we're heading to destruction, it becomes much more likely that we're going to go into that direction, right? Which is the same thing that you can see in the Middle East. Like, if you agree that the narrative is chaos, like it's just going to lead to more chaos. And that's certainly something that I hope will be relieved in the U.S. But of course, like you're saying, you know, there's this element of needing to teach people how to fish and also just sort of buoy people's belief that we can get out of it. You know, we can decide on a different narrative and build that narrative together.
And highlight positive stories. I mean Tunisia, and actually it's something country that we highlighted a lot within our work. I mean Tunisia is the Arab country. It's actually the only Arab country that had a successful Arab Spring revolution that ended up evolving in a democracy. So this is a country from the region that, with some help of related to ideas, they eventually were able to turn into a positive direction.
Yep.
And so that I think is that there's definitely the element of how shaping positive narratives and giving people hope is actually a driver for versus the nihilistic version that empowers more the extremists than empowers those who want to do good in the world.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we haven't talked about yet is I know you have a couple of new exciting projects in the works for early 2021. So why don't you tell us about those?
Sure. So, I mean, we will continue and expand our translation efforts and content creation for this year. So we're definitely sticking on that being kind of the core program. And then the other program, we're launching actually multiple pilot programs. The first one is a fellowship program so we have these ideas that we have made available from critical thinking, all of that stuff. We would like to give fellowship of people who convert these into something relevant to the community. So, and that's where we fund those who take these ideas into action. Whether somebody wants to create a small political party and runs for city council, or somebody needs a camera to start a YouTube channel, we're able to really take these ideas into action. How can we not stay only within the world of ideas, but take them from that ideas into theoretical into the practical? So we are investing in that this year. And also, I mean, the subject of taking ideas into action. I mean, so one of the things that we promote a lot is pluralism and the importance of coexistence of people of different ethnicities and different cultures. And post-ISIS and really post-ISIS Iraq is a very traumatized Iraq. And also the continuation of lack of dependency and lack of connection between all of these sects is there. And one of the projects that we are first designing the plan for in terms of logistics, but also going to work on by March, is to build programs, is to make these different sects dependent on each other. So in that way, when the narrative comes in that the Yazidis are evil or the Christians are part of the Western imperialism, all of that stuff, and have that connection with, oh, but my coworker is a Christian. Oh, I've been with the Yazidis to school. That in a way would reduce that extremist narrative and divisive narrative. So we're designing this program of how can we make many of these folks dependent on each other economically, and that could be the support of some entrepreneurship or workshops related to the subject. And then the other one, which back to the kind of the post-ISIS situation, and part of the reason why we're focusing on that area, because again, it's a fertile ground for, I mean, ISIS will come back, and the question is that how can we reduce their narrative is the appeal here, and we have received multiple requests from libraries that were destroyed by ISIS. Like, you're an organization about knowledge and about ideas, and we have the situation in which many of our students, by the thousands, do not have access to books because the libraries were all destroyed. And will you be able to help us with that? And after multiple conversations internally and also seeing if there are universities in the US that can help, and Harvard Medical School actually was one of the universities that they're willing to donate some of their books to be given to these universities. So there are multiple. So there's actually work that I need to do to see how can we make that sustainable in a ways that other universities around the world will also constantly supply these. And if many people there have a good college experience, have better life, and they see there is positive things happening in their community, in their cities, again, the appeal of extremists will be much less because nobody wants to go back to what it used to be under them. So the more we can rebuild these cities, the more we can empower these people, I think that is going to have positive effects on the long run.
Yeah, it's a rebuilding project.
Definitely. Maybe we should call that the name of the project. We have been
Feel free to use it. I know if it's helpful. You're more than welcome. All right, Faisal, I think those are all the things that I wanted to hit. Maybe we should say that, if people are interested in your guys' work, the best thing to do is probably go to the website, donate, right? That's the best way.
I mean, I generally ask for two things. I mean, definitely the financial support, and also, I mean, many of our translators live in, as I said, destroyed areas, conflict, all that stuff, and sometimes all what they need is really a message of hope, of people from around the world telling them that their job is important. So if anybody is watching, thinks that our work is important, and if they can record a 1-minute video saying that after I saw the interview with Faisal and we think that this work is important, I'm more than happy to if you send it to us, I'm more than happy to share it to many of these translators who have really every reason to be hopeless. One of the translators called me like a couple of months ago saying that his house was blown up and he couldn't meet the deadline. I'm like, yes, you could definitely. That's a good excuse.
Yeah, that's a valid excuse.
and I think it's that, I mean, many of these people are not motivated by monetary gain. They're motivated because they want to change their community for positive. So there's obviously supporting us financially is great, but also supporting our translators emotionally, making sure that getting them show that they're appreciated, that their work is important. That will be great as well.
Yeah, and that's perfect too, especially because we're certainly in a time where we should be aware that people are struggling with the pandemic. Unemployment is so high, so that's a totally free way to support all this work, which is wonderful. All right, well, Faisal, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have you in the network.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks.